Hello. What I'd like to do now is take your mind back a few years to COVID-19, right? So just prior to that, and even in the opening days of it, right, the start of it, we had explicit statements or declarations even from the World Economic Forum that by the year 2030 you will own nothing and you will be happy. They were talking about developing these smart cities to move people away from the country, allow the country and the earth to regenerate itself, right? This sort of thing. To stop putting so much pressure and so much demand on the earth, on natural resources, on technology and industry, right? And that's coupled with, or is synonymous with, the green agenda, right? Of moving away from fossil fuels. So the way that people, Western civilization, had constructed modern civilization with the Industrial Revolution, the use of fuels to fuel technology, innovation, society itself, right? Modern society as we come to understand it, right? We engage with these things every day. We make use of the products of the systems that we built that is fueled by these natural resources, right? But the green agenda wants to scrap that and move us away, move the West away from using certain fuels. They want to bind us to the windmills and solar panels for northwestern climates, right? So get fueled by the sun, even though you see very little of it, but take your primary fuel from the sun, right? Not silliness, right? But the aim is what's important, and that is, or even you might, if you go along with the idea of wanting to preserve nature, which is a good thing, and allow it to grow and not disappear under the boot of man, of course those are good tendencies, right? Because it allows for the sustainability of nature, right? The very canvas we project our wonder and awe for life onto, and it reflects back to us, right? Nature, this wondrous thing, right? Stand beside a waterfall, listen to it. Birds all moving in the same direction, that sort of thing. We would like to see that continue, of course. But a consequence of pushing in the direction that this agenda has been pushing for a long period of time is, logically, de-industrialisation. The breakdown in the use of technology as we understand it, right? And as we've come to be familiar with it. And the reason I'm talking about that is because this was a stated objective by these big organizations who should have nothing to do with your everyday life, but they do somehow, right? Based on the power and influence and the ownership of companies and all that sort of stuff. And by Klaus Schwab's own testimony, nation states political systems, because he said it himself, we have infiltrated Western governments, right? We have got our people into positions to enact policies that are in line with what we have come up with for people, right? So it's of little concern to these entities and organizations what myself thinks or what the every man or every woman thinks, only in as much as they are maneuverable by these politicians, by these organizations, of which they're a part, right? They go to these meetings, they wear their little symbol of allegiance, their badges, the little rainbowy thing, the spectrum thing that they wear, right? It's open and it's explicit for people. And their aim is to deindustrialize the West. Or the goal they want to achieve of is the zero carbon thing is going to lead inevitably, if fulfilled, to the deindustrialization of the West, which will return everyday people to subsistence living, just getting enough to make sure you get up to just get enough again tomorrow, right? Because there's going to be inevitable breakdowns in the chain of supply with things. There's going to be technologies that are banned from use because of the fuel needed to keep them going, right? And the substitution that is offered to us of solar panels and windmills they've demonstrated that they're incapable of creating the sort of energy needed to maintain the current civilization and current society that we have technologically. So, did they scrap that aim? We came out of COVID prior to 2030, and in which time I do believe that it would have been much more beneficial for people of that persuasion if we were to have remained in lockdown up until 2030 or 2028 for more years than we did have to stay in lockdown, because they were in the process of restructuring society. So we would have come out, been born again into this new world of smart cities, bicycle lanes, cars being limited and eventually just being pushed aside, right? We would have been driving electric cars, but the grid wouldn't have been able to sustain the perpetual charging of these cars. So they would have been phased out as well, right? Because they would have been incapable of sustaining the demand that we have for travel. So we would have switched to electric trains and buses, cram loads of people into small little vehicles and move them along themselves, right? Your ability to travel would have been limited. There would have been pockets of civilizations, and the rural areas then would have been eventually off limits, right? Off limits, because if you're aware, like not the Magna Carta, the Terra Carta, which is a proposal or a project endorsed by Prince Charles or King Charles, which would lead eventually to the earth being given rights that supersede human rights. So if you're doing anything that is deemed to be detrimental to the earth's natural rights would supersede man's rights or desire to engage in a certain action, right? So you would have seen a lot of that, people being shuffled into these smart cities, these limitation places that would have been all recorded, all probably chip card, right? Your money goes onto a card, an ID in your hand, or whatever the case is. This was where it was going, right? So I struggle to see that these entities, these parasites that want to corral you into this limitless living, I don't believe that they've dropped that idea. I don't believe that they've dropped that goal, right? They just have different ways of getting there. And in Ireland's context then, why this is relevant is with the recent spat between Irish politicians and Israeli ambassadors and Israeli embassies and Israel itself, right? Where could this lead to? It could lead back to the same track of deindustrializing Ireland, crippling Ireland structurally and societally. How so? Ireland has a pretty fruitful trade with Israel. We buy more from Israel than they do from us, right? I think it's Ireland buys about 4 billion worth of product from Israel every year, I think. And Israel buys about 500 million worth of product from Ireland. And much of this product, especially from Ireland buying from Israel, is technology, right? It is technology that goes into building semiconductors, which are of paramount importance for nearly all technologies that we use on a day-to-day basis. How does that break it down, right? So we also have the Occupied Bills Act, or whatever act, right? The Occupied Bill stuff. And built into that is the idea that people, corporations, even governments, right, nations, will be restricted. It will be illegal for them to trade with nations that are engaged in whatever sort of brutality, right? Colour it up whatever way you want it, but just talking logistically, it will stop people, countries. Ireland would no longer be allowed trade with Israel, right? And it might not be written that way, but you can see where it's heading, right? And what that would lead to then is Ireland not being able to import the technology that is needed to sustain modern civilization on Irish soil. And what happens as a result of that, being as we're an island, right? The breakdown in the supply chain could cripple Ireland. and have us going back to a subsistence level where we're getting through the day scrounging the basics. It might not happen immediately, but it would end up there, right? It could very well end up there. Technologies would break, they wouldn't be replaced. Over the course of years, certain things would just be phased out. People would forget that they ever used them, and they would get used then to just being serfs on the land again, right? So that's what I believe is one of the main objectives in the international spat between the two countries, is Irish politicians holding up their end of the bargain. They've been put in place, they've been supported, they've probably been funded, they've been endorsed, right? They've been given massive stages speaking at these WEF seminars or workshops or whatever you want to call them. And the goal of that then is to de-industrialise Ireland, to destroy the Irish people's capability of ever overthrowing any government or control mechanism that has retained its use of technology. And you can see this as well with Eamon Ryan and all the rest of them, right? They'll all chime on about reducing carbon emissions and reducing our carbon footprint and being better for the environment and all that sort of stuff, right? And reaching our goals and our quotas and all that sort of stuff. Meanwhile, they're taking private jets to fly to different countries. They have cars that are driving them, right? Eamon Ryan gets pulled up a couple of blocks away from where he's going, and then he gets out of the car and onto the bike, and he's after pretending he's cycled to where he was going, right? This sort of thing. Total hypocrisy on display. Unless you read between the lines, and they might not necessarily be being hypocritical at all. You're just not accepting them for what they're showing you to be, which is limiting of technology for you, not for me, for you. You will be reduced to flying around on bikes and pulling your dinner from the ground day to day. You'll be reduced to that. We won't. We'll maintain our ability to use technology. We will do that. But by us confusing you enough and facilitating and grooming your acceptance of that sort of living, they will retain total domination and total power over you. Because how are you going to fight back? How are you possibly going to fight back against? It'd be the equivalent of taking people from the 1700s in Ireland and having them battle a modern day people. In terms of physical brute force, maybe that would have been an advantage to these people. But technologically, they're worlds apart. And we look like we are about to be sliding back into that sort of living again, right? And that's what's underneath the stupid verbals, right? The Palestinians and all that nonsense. Because all of these little cults that are hanging on either side of these things, they're all involved in one way or another with going along with the idea of de-industrialising Ireland. And if they're not involved, because you see a lot of the counter to this stuff is, if we just had our old Catholic ways, if we just became Christian again, then we would be able to stop what's happening. Perhaps. But we can't go back. We can't go back. Because there's limits involved in that worldview as well, and we lived through the limits. And now we kind of look back, and because today is so bad, we look back on yesterday, which had its serious problems, and we go, that was a bit better if we could just bring that back. We can't, right? We will have to come up with something new. We will have to create something new. And if our ability to innovate, if our ability to extend our physical senses and our physical and mental capabilities is taken away from us, we are in a world of trouble in this country, and it could be hundreds of years before we develop the ability again to face off with something. We're in a great position at the moment because we have nearly, from what is on show anyway, we have the same capabilities and the same technologies in our own hands as those that are in control have, right? So we're in a great position. But what are your thoughts on that?